Now, I am pleased to introduce our speaker for this evening. Our speaker is Dr. Cindy Haynes, and Dr. Haynes is a professor of horticulture and a CELT faculty fellow at Iowa State University in Ames, Iowa. Her primary responsibilities are in teaching and extension. She teaches several courses for the Department of Horticulture and for the Center of Excellence in Learning and Teaching. She has extension responsibilities in consumer or home horticulture, and she is also on the advisory committee for the Iowa Master Gardener program. So thank you for being here with us this evening, Cindy.
So welcome to tonight's presentation. I have the pleasure of talking a little bit about sensory gardens. I appreciate that the ask so that I can actually talk about this. I do have a master's and PhD in horticulture, and I am an instructor for the herbaceous ornamentals class. So I know a little something about some of the plants that we're going to talk about. Let's see. There's some things that I hope you get out of this session as well. I hope you, when we talk about all these different senses, you can recognize all the plants that you already know that kind of can be associated with some of those different sensory garden features. And I will interweave, hopefully, throughout a little bit about design tips on how to use them or how I would use this kind of collection of plants or sensory garden tips or design features for kids or for adults. I am going to also try and engage you in this as well. So after each one of these senses, I'm going to ask you for other plant ideas. So get ready to type some things into the chat. We're going to start this off with the five senses, and you already know what the five senses are. We're going to try and align some of those plants that I think really align well with that sense. I'm going to start with sight because I think color is hugely important in the garden. And this is one of the reasons why we decide on what plants we have in our garden. I like certain colors. I'm drawn to certain colors, and I suspect that you are as well. Colors help set a mood. They also kind of entertain us, and they are a real showcase of seasonality. Some of the flowers that I think about, perennial flowers for color, are things like coneflower in all the different colors that it comes in. Virginia bluebells, because I think it's one of the best blues and is a great symbol of spring. Lenten rose. I already have some Lenten rose coming up in my garden and getting ready to bloom because they're one of the first things that bloom in my garden. I like Lenten rose as well, or hellebores, because they have a lot of different color options. I can get really good greens and really dark burgundies. Hibiscus is another one that I love as a perennial flower because it's a giant flower. Giant red, giant pink, giant white flowers, sometimes generally in mid to late summer, and sometimes into the fall. And then another one that is one of my favorites is butterfly weed because it's got this brilliant orange color. Some of the flowers I chose for perennial flowers for this mix, for the site mix, were a mix of kind of natives as well as some things that didn't provide as much scent or texture, touch, kind of tactile things. But their color is so brilliant and so diverse through the seasons that I think you can't miss them. One of those that's in the center is sapphire flower. This one does have some kind of tactile. It looks really spiky, but it's not. And it kind of comes in this bluish color, bluish purple color. It's also closely related to rattlesnake master, which is a nice native. Phlox is another one I want you to think about for flowers. Lots of colors in phlox as well. The pure white of phlox is one of my favorites. And then Blazing Star or Liatris is a wonderful one, not only for its height and structure, but this kind of purple spike of flower really stands out in the garden because it's a very linear flower. So it puts that color in a line instead of something round. And then I can't wait for daffodils to show up. And I also can't wait for black-eyed Susans to kind of end the season. All of these are wonderful perennial flowers. There's some annual flowers you should consider too for color. Nothing compares to zinnias. You get almost every color in zinnias, some of the best greens. Every color except for true blue and probably really dark black. Um, Salvia gives you the blue, the annual salvias. Sunflowers are a lot of color options now too. And I don't want you to forget about vines like Black-Eyed Susan vine, um, great ones for having a couple of different colors, including the yellow with the black center. I like this kind of a peachy one with a black center. And then impatiens. All of these other annuals are full sun annuals. Impatiens like the shade, and they do really well in the shade, and especially moist soils and shade. And I love all the colors of impatiens. I think it's amazing when you plant them all together, and it's like this intermix of colors throughout the shade. Really livens up kind of a dark corner. Some other annual flowers to consider are begonia. I like begonias because the leaves are kind of thick and succulent. They will take part shade to shade. And there's even some begonias that are doing really well in full sun. So you have a lot of options there. I love the green of Bells of Ireland. This is a great annual cut flower too. It's a little floppy in the garden sometimes, but I love it. Lantana is a butterfly and bee magnet. Oranges, yellows, pinks, and reds. Nothing beats dahlias for late summer. I put this one with the annual group because it doesn't overwinter as well in Iowa, so sometimes we need to dig it up. But that means you can change colors or add two colors in your garden. And then lobelia is another one I love in the spring and the fall in containers or hanging baskets because it's got this brilliant blue, tiny little flower, likes it cooler, and will tolerate a little bit of shade, but it will attract your attention just from that brilliant blue color from quite a distance, even for something that's so small. So those are a few annual flowers. There are some shrubs and trees that I would also like to mention as well, because color is in so many things. And while this says flowers, I am going to put a fruit in there with calocarpa or French mulberry. This is something that fruits late in the season. And this is a shrub that's a little bit different. It likes some shade. It sometimes has some serious dieback over the winter, but usually blooms and fruits on new growth. So usually you still have a nice shrub by the end of the season with these wonderful purple fruits all along the stems, which is kind of fun. Another one to consider is Rose of Sharon. This is also called Althea shrub. Whites, pinks. They call this a blue flower color. It tends to be a little more purple, but I love it as well. This is a Rose of Sharon picture that I took from the state fairgrounds because it's just really a nice shrub that does really well there. Uh, Buckeye, Aesculus is another summer bloomer. I put the bottle brush buckeye with the shrubs because it tends to stay under 10 feet. And it blooms usually around the 4th of July. So late June, early July. I love these kind of white bottle brush type flowers. Very nice in kind of a partial shaded situation. And then for spring bloom, nothing beats azaleas. If you're thinking about azaleas, the deciduous of azaleas, particularly the ones from Minnesota, the Northern Lights series are fantastic. You get a lot of colors in this. This is one called Lemon Lights. There's Northern Lights, Rosy Lights, Mandarin Lights. You pick lots of options with azaleas. also a part shade plant. And then hydrangeas, here's another one that likes some shade or sun, depending on what kind of situation you have and which hydrangea you're actually trying to grow. This is a paniculata type. It tends to be a really durable hydrangea. And while I like the pink and the blue hydrangeas, this one's much more carefree. And I love that it kind of has a little bit of that green tinge to it, or some of the cultivars actually go rosy red as the flowers age. So changing of the flower color is another nice kind of feature. Some of these get quite large. I told you the bottle brush buckeye can get up, over 6 feet. The hydrangeas can also get 5 to 7 feet. And the azaleas can get pretty big too. So is that Rose of Sharon. So these are fairly large shrubs, but they're smaller than the trees that are here as well. Magnolias hopefully will be in bloom and doing beautifully this spring. This is a saucer magnolia on campus here in Ames, and when it's in bloom, it attracts so much attention. Every graduating senior takes a picture next to this magnolia in their cap and gown because it just makes for good photography. Red butts are another one that are really nice in the spring. We have them all over campus as well. Crab apples are another May bloomer, early May bloomer too. And the buckeyes. This is, or horse chestnuts. When they're the bigger tree, we call them horse chestnuts. We have several of these on campus as well. Some of the other things to think about for more summer bloom is this Seven Suns flower. This is a heptacodium, and it starts blooming sometime in August and September. And it is another butterfly magnet when it's in bloom. Very few trees are blooming that late. It's a smaller tree, so it gets easily 20 feet tall, but it usually doesn't make that kind of 40 feet tall that the magnolia and maybe even a crabapple can be, or a buck or horse chestnut. Horse chestnut. I also don't want you to forget about foliage. Foliage is another fantastic way to get color in the garden, and this could be something like caladium or hosta if you're in the shade. The nice thing about foliage in the shade is it's there the entire season. So you have this brilliant pink or the uh, gray blue of hosta throughout the entire season. And foliage is usually less care as well. Caladium is treated like an annual. It's dug up every year or replanted every year, a lot like the coleus and the canna that are here. The coleus, you have tons of options and colors. I picked this one because it kind of matched some of the other things that were going on, but you can have dark burgundy foliage, green foliage, white foliage, and they are sun-loving types as well as shade-loving types. So lots of options dependent on cultivar. The canna is really nice, whether it's the green foliage type or the burgundy foliage type or the variegated foliage type, because it's such a large leaf, it gives every garden this kind of instant tropical look. Someone's going to think you're growing banana or growing these kind of tropical, because it's a big kind of tropical leaf. It's a fun thing to have. And then I will say that I am partial to a lot of coral bells as well. And I love the foliage of coral bells because you can have the burgundy purple, you can have this amazing kind of peachy pink. You've got nice golden chartreuse yellows, as well as variegated in all different shapes and sizes. And with all of these, there's flowers too. But the first feature, the first focal feature is on the foliage. The coral bells, if you haven't grown them before, are great things to have in the shade or part shade. Okay, so that was very quickly through a lot of plants that feature just kind of color. What else am I missing? So this is where I want you to type into the chat a few things that you think that are colorific, things that you have in your garden because it's all about color. We use color sometimes in containers at entryways. We use color sometimes to have attract attention, right? To think about our moods. Okay. Ah, I'm getting some other things in the chat from different people. Some of them, like lilies and marigolds, we'll talk about later, but iris is a good one. Iris literally means rainbow, and it comes in a rainbow of colors. We'll get to daylilies too. Yes. 4 o'clocks are another one that's been mentioned that has some nice variety of color. And we're getting into some evergreens as well, which we'll talk about evergreens too. I'm going to give you another 10 seconds to type something in. Ah, nice coreopsis, lavender, foxgloves, all of these daisies, all of these have been mentioned. Good. And including Japanese maple. I like it. If you're new to gardening, sometimes having these lists from other people are great kind of suggestions and things to kind of think about when you're thinking about color or plants for your garden. Good. We've got it down. So next up, the next sense that I'm going to focus on is sound. And I will be honest, sound is sometimes hard to think about plants that produce sound. So think about those plants that you want to add to the list. I think about sound as something nice in the garden. So there's nice sounds. And then there's ways to use plants maybe to eliminate some sounds as well. I think about plants in the winter when I think about sound in the garden. So this is a switchgrass that was in my front garden one winter, and it got all iced over, and in the wind it made this kind of really interesting sound. I also think about wildlife, birds, and other things that make sound in your garden. And I'm starting to hear the birds again this spring. And then I also think about water, and water and wind chimes, water and wind, as other things that kind of make sound in the garden. Sometimes nice sounds. Some of the plants that I think about, and this is a pretty limited list, is false indigo. I like the sounds, how the pods rattle after the flowers are done or late in the season. I also like these black pods in kind of container displays around Halloween because they're black and they kind of rattle. Oh, and then I also think of ornamental grasses like sea oats. Sometimes they have these different seed heads that tend to move a lot in the wind. So and make a little bit of a sound as well. And then I think about, you might think it's weird to put evergreens in the sound category, but remember, sometimes we want to block some sounds or kind of make it a little more quiet, kind of like that snowy day, how it kind of dampens a lot of sounds. Sometimes evergreens, windbreaks. This is a spruce, a golden spruce, or arborvitaes are sometimes used to kind of limit some of those sounds. I notice more sounds in the winter when there are not leaves on the trees. So sometimes that's good to have some evergreens helping block those sounds. So this is the time for you to talk about other sounds that you see. Oh, cottonwoods, that's a good one, Joan. Pine trees when they're moving. Aspens might be a good one to add to this list too. Um, Mark talked about bumblebees. That's a good one. Wind chimes. Thank you. Owls. That's an awesome one. Usually at night. Frogs, another one. Bamboo has also been mentioned. And then, yes, Jane mentioned the trains nearby. That's another sometimes good one. Uh, Great one is thinking about rain and water and kind of weather in particular. Sometimes those sounds get loud, but I love a little bit of rain at the time. Good. You've got a lot of things going in. Squirrels chattering in the trees, purple martins flying by. Some of the ways that I like to use sound in the garden, and most people do too, most gardeners as well, is to have a water fountain. Sometimes these fountains cover up some of those nearby sounds, like some traffic, and at least you start to focus on that, and it's very calming. And then I also think about, this doesn't always have to be kind of a wet space. Maybe it's a dry space, so we can hear other things kind of slithering through the garden, even with something like hens and chicks. Good. Ooh, electric fence is a sound I haven't thought about. So that's one I will have to think about as a way to deter animals, as a good sound. Crickets and doves are also mentioned as good sounds. So you'll notice that sounds in the garden are mostly not plant related. So think about also those sounds like gourds, maybe that you can make music with if you want to have make some fun sounds in the garden. So let's switch gears and talk a little bit about touch. This is another fun one to do in the garden. I think about touch as this way to really focus in on some of your senses. And sometimes these touches may be a little prickly, like in some hollies, or really soft and calming. I give all of my students a lamb's ear leaf when we're out on a field trip because it's nice and calming and they get to pet it. So it kind of calms them down as we're taking that ID quiz throughout the garden. And then I also think of how some plants are really fragile and very sensitive to certain types of touch, even this dandelion weed. Some perennials that we think about for touch and this kind of tactile is pig squeak, which didn't show up here, and it's my favorite. Pig squeak is a perennial that I want you to look up. It's got really big leaves, and I like it for sound and touch because when you stroke the leaf, it's very glabrous leaf. It kind of makes this squeaking sound. And if you are really kind of not listening very well, it sounds like a pig. It doesn't really sound like a pig, but it does squeak, which is kind of a fun thing to do with kids. It's a fun thing to do and to laugh in the garden. Other things to touch in the garden include prickly pear. Prickly pear is a fun one. I don't want you to have things in the garden that people will fall into, but sometimes touch isn't always soft. So think about that way. And I love prickly pear because the fruit are edible, so it could go in another category too. I also love thinking about sedums and succulents in the garden because that succulent leaf is another nice thing to touch. And it's very calming to think about how to touch even something that's glabrous. Maybe it's not super soft. And then I love this picture. This is moss in a garden. This is moss on a top of a brick fence in Philadelphia. Um, this is the perfect environment to grow it because it's very shaded. But I always like touching moss or lichen whenever you see it. It's not something that's super easy to grow, but we should touch when we see it. It's a fun one. And then I put Virginia creeper in this mix because I want you to touch Virginia creeper. This is Boston ivy or a Parthenocissus. It's got great fall color. We sometimes confuse Virginia creeper or Boston ivy with poison ivy, however. So there are some things I don't want you to touch, and that would be poison ivy. So look up Boston ivy and Virginia creeper so you know what they look like because they're kind of fun and they like touching walls. And then you can avoid the poison ivy and not touch that one. Annuals are next. There's a few annuals that I want you to touch as well. You probably have all touched sensitive plant. This is the one in the center. This is the one that responds to touch. You can grow this one from seed. It's pretty easy to grow. It has a really cool flower, and it is so fun to touch and see this thigmotropic response, how the leaves kind of fold up as you touch it. Kind of fun. Another one to play with that's an annual is called Rose Balsam. This is also called Touch Me Not. And it's not because it's poisonous or it's going to give you a rash. It's an annual that actually, when the flowers are done and the fruit starts to ripen, if you brush past it, it ejects those seeds and kind of catapults them several feet away from the plant. And that is so much fun to watch and try and get it to do this seed scattering bit. Of course, that means it's going to reseed in a few places and come up again and again. But it's a lot of fun and it's pretty easy to pull if you don't want it in the middle of your lawn, which it will try to reseed there until you mow it. And then lastly, like I said, don't be afraid of some of the things that are a little spiky, that are a little spiny. Agave, aloe, some of these succulents, hens and chicks would be another one that would be good for touch. I also think of some trees and shrubs for touch as well. I think of bark, especially this time of year. I love peeling off a few pieces of bark of the paper bark maple. That's a fun one. And telling my students that it's super thin and it's thin as paper. That's how it got its name. Sycamore is another one to kind of touch and have fun with. Get a ridged and furrowed bark like from walnut, and you can do kind of crayon rubbings on it as well. That's kind of fun as a way to touch. I love the pines, and I love Eastern white pine because that's one a really soft one to touch, and it's a fun one with a little bit of fragrance and a fun one to kind of stroke and touch just a little bit as you go by. Almost all your evergreens are kind of fun to touch. Some are a little spikier than others. Sometimes junipers can be a little spiky, and sometimes they can be super soft as well. And then I think this one's fun too. Take a walk in the woods and look for a honey locust. This one produces some major thorns, kind of this three-pronged thorn, which could be very dangerous, but it's kind of fun to try and wrestle with this and you will not win. But it's a fun one to see how spiky and defensive some plants can be. So as you're typing in some other things to touch, I'm putting in the lawn or the grass because my dog loves it. We love it. This is a place to picnic. Trent put in mullein. That's another one that's super soft. Um, Basil, a lot of the herbs. We're going to get to herbs when we talk about smell. Yes, yes. Peony flowers are super super delicate to touch. Ooh, I like that one, Lynette. Yucca is another good one to touch because it's a little bit different. So things to think about. Got a lot of seed heads being mentioned that you can kind of crush and touch, and grasses are mentioned as well. So I'll give you another 10 seconds if you've got some others to think about for touch. Straw flower and gomphrena and thistle. These are flowers that get a little bit soft and also be a little bit dry at the same time. So good, good. You've got some fun ones mentioned. Now we're going to go on to smell. I think smell is one of my favorites because smell evokes a lot of memories in people. It's very easy to kind of think about the last time you smelled this. So think of smell is very powerful as a sensory garden feature. So think about this. So I'm going to say, how many of you thumbs up if you like the smell of paper whites? I've got one. I've got a few others. Okay. Great. There's a few thumbs up for paper whites. Paper whites are very strong smell. So I'm going to ask now, thumbs down if you can do it. How many of you don't like paper whites? I think the smell is very strong. It needs to be in a very large room, very large room. Yes, they're putting it into the chat. No, I don't like it. Thumbs down. So some people have opinions about smells, and that's what I want you to remember. So some of these you might want to try first or sniff first before you put them into the garden, because some people get a headache from paper white flower smells. This is also the case sometimes with certain foliage and certain herbs as well. It's something to consider. This is Artemisia. This is a wormwood. It also has a very distinctive smell, and you either kind of love it or you hate it. It's a beautiful silvery foliage in the garden, but very distinctive scent. And then we'll get into herbs here too. Pine needles. I see, Dee Dee, that's a good one as well. We'll get into herbs, and lavender is one of those that has a super popular scent, and we use it for a lot of things. And I love the flowers of lavender as well, because it's not only the foliage, but the flowers are fragrant. Some perennials that I always insist on having in my garden because they smell so good are things like peonies. Peonies have a nice scent in the spring. Lily of the Valley, this is another one that's really potent for something that only gets about this tall. You can put a few of those in a vase and it will perfume a room. Sweet Autumn Clematis ends the season. So peonies and Lily of the Valley are spring. Sweet Autumn Clematis is August and September, and a wonderful scent as well. And then lilies, this is an Easter lily, but a lot of the Oriental lilies have wonderful fragrance. If you've gotten a bouquet of stargazer lilies, you know what that fragrance is like. And then sweet woodruff is another one that's kind of a ground cover that's in spring that has a nice delicate fragrance as well. That's some of the perennials. Some of the annuals to consider for fragrance. Sometimes it's foliage, like scented geraniums. Sometimes it's flowers like sweet pea, which is a good cool season annual vine. I love heliotrope in the summer. This one has a nice kind of perfumey fragrance in kind of full sun. And then petunias are really lovely fragrance as well. And then Sweet Alyssum is a wonderful spring and fall kind of cool season ground cover that's got some fantastic fragrance as you kind of walk through the garden. A few trees and shrubs to consider. I would be remiss if I didn't mention roses, if I didn't for summer, if I didn't mention lilacs for spring. Um, and then sometimes even witch hazels, depending on which species you have for early spring or fall. They have a nice kind of delicate scent as well. Japanese tree lilac is another one that blooms in late spring, early summer, and has a very sweet fragrance. It's different than lilacs. It's a different species, but it's blooms at an odd time and does attract a lot of pollinators as well. And then I'm putting linden in here because some of the lindens have fantastic fragrance and you don't recognize it until you're walking by and then you kind of smell the sweet scent of lindens. I see that you're already started putting things into the chat. Um, so Russian sage has been mentioned. Ooh, dictamnus, this is the gas plant, has been mentioned. Honeysuckle has been mentioned as well. Just make sure it's not an invasive one. Yes, marigolds are very distinctive. Geraniums also have very distinctive smells as well. Eucalyptus is a nice annual that's been mentioned, and bee balm. I've got bee balm coming up. Oh, and Veronica mentioned popcorn plant. This is a fun one to try if you have kids. This is kind of a tropical plant that we plant outside, and you rub the flowers, just a little bit of rub up against the flowers, and you would swear it smells like buttered popcorn. It's very cool. Very cool. And this is why I have moonvine and mock orange on this slide, because sometimes, like I said, scent is something very powerful. And think about using these flowers or these things in Alzheimer's gardens. Lilacs bring back lots of memories for people. Or mock orange is another one that's been around a long time. It's almost like an heirloom shrub. Spireas sometimes as well. And they kind of bring back memories for some people. And then the moon garden. If you want to have a nice calming space, have a white garden with things like moonvine or moonflower that'll attract bats to your garden. But usually it's wonderful scents and very calming as well. So good. Few other things I'm going to quickly go through taste because we all know what we like for taste. We all know that there are fruits and vegetables that we can grow in the garden. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention apples and corn as two things that you can grow in the garden for taste and to eat. I'm also going to mention a few flowers. This is my favorite flower to try an edible flower to eat. And it's a type of marigold called the kind of signet marigold. Teeny tiny little flowers, but taste a little more lemony than the typical marigold. And it's an annual one. So a few of the herbs and vegetables, this is where you can go crazy with different types of herbs. Have some annual herbs like basil and cilantro. Think about mint and chives as perennial herbs. Please plant mint in a container so it doesn't go everywhere. But it's a wonderful one to have. And then get into the vegetables. Get into eggplant. Get into peppers. Get into tomatoes. Anything that you like. There's lots of options for eating when we're talking about vegetables and herbs. There are some other perennial and annual flowers you should consider as well. Many of these will work well near your vegetable garden. Nasturtiums are fantastic. You can eat the flowers or the foliage. It's a cool season annual that does well in the spring and again in the fall. Same with pansies. Pansies are fantastic additions to the top of a cupcake. lots of colors. And once again, like the cool season, spring or fall. Daylilies have edible flowers too. They're great additions to salads. I tell my students it tastes like buttered lettuce. So, but if you're putting ranch on it on a salad, it'll be fine. Bee balm is sometimes reminds me of Earl Grey tea, and it's another edible. And then marigolds, the regular marigolds are edible too. They're just a little stronger tasting than the signet marigolds. And then we have lots of shrubs and trees, including typical fruit trees like apples and pears, some shrubs like raspberry, blackberry. Um, I love the serviceberry as an option because it's a nice ornamental, nice flowers, nice fruit, nice fall color. Pawpaw is another one to consider. If you can find it, find that kind of part shade situation for it. It's a nice fall fruit and very banana mango custardy taste. Sounds weird. It's delicious. And then aronia berries are another things that I need to mention. They're probably not my favorite because they're super, super tart. But they're incredibly healthy and a beautiful shrub, and then sometimes eaten quite nicely by wildlife too. I think about edible gardens as great places for enabling gardens as well. So growing them in raised beds or containers for kids or for those that have some um, mobility issues. This is fantastic way to grow vegetables. I even have kind of raised beds for some of my vegetables as well. So what other ideas do you have? I see Lori's mentioned horseradish. I've seen Dennis has mentioned gooseberries. Anne has honeyberry and Jennifer has currants. So lots of fruit options there too. Rhubarb has been mentioned. Thank you, Sandra. And blueberries if you have the right soil pH. So some good ones to consider. I think with that, we've kind of gone through most of the different senses and the plants that you might consider for those senses. I want to make a couple of reminders when we're creating a sensory garden, whether you're creating it for yourself, you're creating it for kids, or you're creating this for someone that maybe has Alzheimer's or mobility issues. Universal design concepts are still pretty important. Think about accessibility. What's the hardscape? How easy it is to get to the garden because you want them to touch. You want them to smell. So you want them to kind of engage all of those senses. So make sure that the access is easy to get to. And then think about some ideas to engage and interact with whoever's visiting your garden. Recognize that these plants can align with the senses. Recognize the fact that there is a seasonality to this. So lilacs will be great in the spring. So maybe having a bench near the lilac and then moving that to somewhere else at other parts or other times or other seasons. And then maybe it's a way to educate kids. I love having a Crayola garden or a color garden, and then having containers of different plants in different colors, right? And then teaching kindergartners or pre-K kids that this is yellow, this is purple. And sometimes it gets a little tricky because blue's hard to get and purple is sometimes pinkish. So get them thinking about that kind of their senses as well. And then I like working with kids and thinking about the different herbs. So when do they think about mint, because it tastes like a peppermint, or oregano reminds them of pizza. So use that sense of smell to kind of relate back to where they've smelt that before. that's kind of my wrap up of my talk. Thinking about the sensory garden as a way to kind of slow down and be a little more mindful and to think about engaging in the garden with different senses and in different ways. So we're not rushing around quite as much. Thank you so much for participating and listening. I think that Alicia has put some stuff into the chat. So, and I hope I have a few questions in the Q&A as well. And I hope you put them in the Q&A because there was a lot of stuff that happened in the chat. So, and that was my job today. So, what do you have for me,
Yeah,
Alicia?
so we have some great questions. Going all the way back to the beginning of the presentation, you talked about the sapphire flower, and
Mhm.
someone was asking if that is also known as sea holly.
Um, yes, there are some that are called sea holly. The genus is called Eryngium. So there's a couple of things called sea holly, but I think that's what usually has sea holly as a common name as well.
Yeah, I think that's a good reminder that common names can sometimes
Hmm.
be too common and they can go with multiple different things. So you
Right.
really want to make sure that you know what exactly you're talking about if you're looking for something specific.
This is true. So, and I'm sorry, I did not put genera on any of this. I just used common names, but you know how to Google, so you can look at pictures and see things that are similar.
Yeah. And then we also had someone about asking about sweet autumn clematis and if that's invasive in Iowa.
It is aggressive. It is aggressive, and I saw someone mention that lily of the valley is aggressive too. Vines are notorious for very vigorous growth. I would say with both those, lily of the valley and sweet autumn clematis, you need to manage them and make sure that they're not becoming an issue. It's not technically a noxious weed, so it's not something that reseeds and becomes a huge issue. So it's not going to make that noxious weed list. I think we have some other things to worry about, but they're both aggressive, yes.
Okay. And then there was a really good question in the chat that was from a master gardener. I believe he's a master gardener up in the northeastern part of the state. But he was asking about they are helping a town with plant selection for planters that are out on Main Street, which I know a lot of master gardener groups do. And they're large pots. And the problem is that the sun exposure is very different on different parts of the street.
Sure.
So they were wondering, how they would select appropriate plants for that, if there are some resources that we would recommend. I did put into the answer for that question the Perennials for Sun and Perennials for Shade publications, which
Right?
are two really great publications. But are there any other publications or resources that you would suggest that people think about when they're doing those plant selections?
Sure. So there's also there's often a lot of annuals that are put in those planters as well. And there's a publication from ISU Extension on annuals as well. We'll divide it into sun and shade loving annuals. So I would do a mix of different things and maybe include a lot of annuals. So on one side of the street, it might be begonias and impatiens, and the other side, it might be zinnias, depending on what that sun exposure is. And you can still have fun with it, and they can still be all the same colors if you want to kind of have a consistent theme. And I love when master gardeners do this and they put little labels in some of those different containers so that people who walk by, like me, when I'm taking pictures, then I know maybe what cultivar that is and see how well it's doing. So it becomes very educational very easily. So yes.
Yeah, and one last question that we had that was,
Mhm.
kind of random, but kind of a fun question. Is it possible to pollard an oak tree?
I do see pollarding a lot in Europe. I see this with some maples. I see this with lindens a lot. I think if it was a fairly fast-growing oak tree, it would be possible. Um, if it's a slow-growing oak tree, I probably wouldn't do it. Yeah, I guess it great extension answer is it depends. Um, I think an established oak tree that was pretty fast growing could probably handle it. Jeff Isles would probably scream at us right now for doing that kind of pruning to an oak. So this is more commonly done with, say, maples. So, and certain maples, I will say, not all maples.